Hey there. Please like, share, and subscribe. She's made a quota for me, and if we don't hit 300, Hillary said she's going to wipe my server. I don't know what that means.
Well, folks, a race to find a missing submarine, a Tik Tok coup in Russia, billionaire cage fights, yoga at the UN. We've got quite a news roundup for you today. You're watching the Ministry of Propaganda. Let's dive right in. Prigozhin, the leader of the Russian private military company Wagner, announced on Saturday evening that Wagner mercenaries had abandoned their attempted insurrection just hours before a potential assault on Moscow. It was the first coup attempt in Russia in 3 decades, in a deal brokered by Belarus leader Alexander Lukashenko. Prigozhin said his convoy of troops, weapons, and tanks would stop their journey towards Moscow and return to their bases after 24 hours of crisis in which the Kremlin scrambled to turn the capital into a fortress to fight off the rebels. Dmitry Peskov, President Vladimir Putin's spokesman, said that fighters from Prigozhin's militia would not be charged because of their deeds on the front. He added that some Wagner fighters who came to their senses and had not taken part in the uprising would sign contracts with the Russian Defense Ministry. Prigozhin has agreed to leave Russia for Belarus as part of the deal to end his armed uprising, with charges against him to be dropped, the Kremlin said. Well, history tells me that sending a bald Russian man into exile might not mean that it's the last we hear of him. Our hosts, Rich and Chris, will be talking about this in just a moment. And now we turn to the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean, where this week international teams spent days desperately searching for a deep-diving submersible that went missing while exploring the wreck of the Titanic. Unfortunately, all 5 people on board, including some billionaires, were already dead and had probably died instantly when the submarine imploded last Sunday. The U.S. Navy knew this but couldn't tell anyone because the sensor they used was a super sneaky secret. It's a story that captured the world's attention but raised a lot of questions too, particularly because of the extensive search effort, which contrasted drastically with a much bigger tragedy that struck off the coast of Greece, where a fishing boat carrying hundreds of migrants capsized, resulting in over 300 Pakistani lives lost. 5 versus 300. Well, all lives are equal, but maybe some are more equal than others. Shifting our attention to Ukraine, things have been quite a roller coaster there. Firstly, a bridge connecting Ukraine to Crimea was reportedly struck by Kyiv, but reportedly some of the arms donated by other countries have turned out to be nothing more than scrap metal. Ouch! Ukraine has finally made its first minor territorial gain in the southern Zaporizhia region since its counteroffensive started. Zelensky said that the offensive was not like Hollywood, and we should be patient. I sort of disagree with him. Hundreds of millions of dollars investment that turns out to be a flop? Has he watched Cats or a Transformers movie? That's one of the most Hollywood things to be. In China, our very own Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, made a groundbreaking visit. The first by a U.S. Secretary of State since 2018. He's on a mission to mend the strained relations between Beijing and Washington. Now, some of those congressional Republicans didn't seem too thrilled about it. They accused Blinken of jeopardizing national security and wanting to cozy up to China. They sure like that hardline approach. But Blinken, undeterred, stressed the importance of direct engagement and communication at the highest levels. He even tried to open up a military-to-military communications channel with China, but they gave him the cold shoulder. Oh, well, back to the drawing board. Blinken also made it clear that the U.S. doesn't support Taiwanese independence and upholds the one China policy. Well, thanks for that flashback to 1972, Blinken. Thanks for making me feel so relevant. Within China itself, we've got some big changes at Alibaba. Daniel Zhang, the chairman and CEO, is stepping down as the company undergoes a major reshuffle. It's all happening amidst Beijing's reform on the big tech companies. Talk about a turbulent time. In other news from the good old U.S. of A., we've got some interesting tidbits for you. According to new census data, the average age of Americans has hit an all-time high, reaching over 38. We're getting older, folks. But hey, age is just a number, right? Now brace yourselves for this one. Elon Musk, the billionaire extraordinaire, challenged Mark Zuckerberg to a cage match. That's right, a cage match. These tech moguls sure know how to keep us entertained. They're even discussing possible venues. Musk suggested the Octagon in Vegas. Well, maybe Zuckerberg could recommend his metaverse. It might finally give people a reason to visit the metaverse. Personally, in light of this week's events, I suggest a nice level playing field for the billionaires.
Maybe the inside of a Titan submersible.
Guess who's making waves in the U.S.? India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He's paying a state visit, and he even led a yoga session at the UN. As you can see, I have dressed for the occasion. These are my yoga pants. That's right, folks. Modi is stretching his diplomatic muscles. For those playing geostrategic chess, India could play a crucial role in countering China's influence, and Modi is seeking defense and technology cooperation. Let's see if he can draw American investment and technology. Oh, and he also held a news conference where he answered questions from the floor. First for him, big whoop, Mr. Modi. Now, let's take a quick look at the squeaky clean and honest world of U.S. politics. Hunter Biden, President Biden's son, is ready to plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax charges. Looks like he might avoid prison time. And in an interesting twist, former President Donald Trump is facing trial for allegedly holding on to confidential documents and obstructing the government's efforts to retrieve them. In case that was too complicated for you, let me rephrase that. So the old president is going to court for hiding top secret nuclear war plans next to his toilet, and the current president's son is going to plead guilty to owning a gun while being addicted to crack. Over in illegally occupied Palestine, tensions are on the rise. After a West Bank settlement was attacked, the settler government decided to build 1,000 new homes in response. That's how you de-escalate tensions. Steal more land. And last but certainly not least, our favorite British-American influencer, Andrew Tate, is facing human trafficking charges in Romania. This looks like such a beta male situation. Tough luck, little buddy. Well, that's all for this week's News Roundup, folks. So stay positive and stay informed, and remember to keep that smile on your face. This is Richard Nixon signing off, reminding you that every day is a great day for propaganda. News.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Rich.
Yes, we're going to be talking about the coup, the Tik Tok coup, the 24-hour coup. And as I've started to like to call it, is I don't think it was a coup, actually. I think it was an attempted road trip. That's actually what I'm calling it, because they didn't quite get to Moscow. Yeah. So, Chris, where do you want to start with this one? Quite an interesting story, right?
Yeah. So the one that I came up with was, it's not a coup, it's a special internal military operation.
Yes.
It's quite refreshing for our show to be able to do an episode where we are breaking news that already has a beginning, middle, and end. When we first started the news broke, we thought this was going to be an ongoing thing. In my research today, I've been looking at the BBC's coverage of it, where they've said Russian potential civil war day 1 update. Like they were salivating at the opportunity for day 2, which hasn't come. So this is a very bizarre situation. There's quite a lot to unpack, and it's going to be interesting to see the ramifications of Friday evening going on to Saturday morning, going into the future, because there's going to be ramifications.
Yeah. I think, as you said, the coverage is always interesting. The BBC and Western media, I didn't know that they'd put day 1 already, sort of implying that this was the beginning of a long, drawn-out civil war. I didn't know that, but I did. I was looking forward to. Sadly, this thing was so quick that we didn't get the chance to start seeing a new, angle and seeing Prigozhin. It's like, oh well, no longer the butcher of Bakhmut or whatever title they might want to give him. Maybe he was going to become the freedom fighter, or maybe become some sort of character that that would have a new name. The Russian Free Syrian Army or something like this. I don't know. But
to be honest, I did think that. So his initial video, I don't want to break the timeline up too much, but his initial video where he declared an uprising against the military top brass. He did a bit of a rant talking about how the Ukrainian war is based on lies and how it's some quite bizarre claims about how it's not a threat for it to join NATO and such on, and it felt like that was just pure opportunism on his part of possibly saying things that he didn't necessarily believe to appease people who are currently his enemies, but it might need to depend on in the future. So, say if it does break out to a wider conflict with the Russian state, maybe then it can sort of say, well, I did say this in this video, so maybe Ukraine and Russia won't, Ukraine and the West won't hate me as much, and they'll think that I was just being used like other people were. It felt like a sort of backdoor clause for himself.
Okay, I see. You mean like? Okay, no, I think what you mean. I think I understand. Yeah. That video was interesting. I mean, he did say like, oh, the denazification stuff is not actually happening because we traded some prisoners, Azov prisoners, with this politician. Yeah. But you know, Prigozhin has also said other stuff in the past which has not been accurate or correct. You know, he does have rants. He goes on these rants, and he seems like quite a loose cannon.
Yes,
evidently so. But as we predicted last week, or this week actually, I should say, when we recorded, we said this: having two armies, having that situation where you don't have one commander over everything. We saw what happened in Sudan, and we were a bit closer to home than we thought. We didn't know this was going to happen like this. But again, like with the whole tail wagging the dog kind of thinking, this story is the fallout. So it's not like Prigozhin was, unilaterally decided he was going to go to Moscow and try and get rid of the defense minister and do whatever this coup effectively. The effort to bring Wagner into the army was already happening. We know that was happening. That's been in news for weeks. After Bakhmut, there was very clear, because of the fact that Prigozhin was already saying all these things, these problematic things, which, as a unit of military, you shouldn't really be doing that. Having disputes with the leadership in the open, but also just under law, it's an illegal. The PMC is illegal, but Wagner's illegal. So this attempted road trip was us seeing that come into life. The fact that he didn't actually, I guess, want to hand over. It's quite obvious that he didn't. I don't know what the details are, but I imagine that he had some sort of ultimatum. Okay, you got to hand over the troops. I believe they were offered new contracts, and that was also the moment when he was like, okay, well, screw this. I'm not losing Wagner. I'm not going to hand over. But the thing, the little detail I quite liked in all of his videos is that he clearly is not confident enough to take on Putin. So he'll never say, I'm going to Moscow to get rid of Putin or stop Putin or whatever. He'll go, the president is being lied to by the defense ministry and they need to be removed. I'm going there to stop the defense ministry or change the defense ministry. He would never say, I'm overthrowing Putin. Which shows how strong Putin is or how weak he thinks his position is.
It's sort of like how central to the sort of new Russian nationalism that Putin, to an extent, it almost revolves around him. Ever since the Russian state, as we know it, as has existed since 1991, majority of that has been shaped and built by Putin and his multiple governments. Mm-hmm. So he is sort of a central character. So it does sort of make sense in that sort of regard. That, not to draw too much of a comparison, but if you were to look at a sort of a figure like the Emperor of Japan in sort of during World War II and after World War II, not that I'm comparing these two at any other level than the base level of, he was sort of seen as almost infallible, and then anything that went wrong, it was the fault of the generals under him. I feel like that's sort of what the Wagner chiefs are sort of suggesting now. It's too dangerous to go after Putin himself, and it would backfire because you're sort of on his tailcoats of popularity and nationalism. But to go after Sorgu and the other military brass, that's doable. So that's how we said it's not a coup. So I'm only going after the military leadership, not the government leadership. It's a fine distinction to make when the military leadership is appointed by Putin Putin has said that this is a stab in the back. This is treason.
Yeah. No, I mean, also, even though he doesn't say I'm going after Putin, he says I'm going after the defense minister. It's, you have to be almost a child or have no understanding of how our government works, because who appoints the defense ministry? It is Putin's defense ministry. So it is directly a challenge to him, but without, but just so veiled, so thinly veiled, that that it's just trying to avoid the political damage of actually mentioning Putin. But and obviously tapping into resentment that they might have.
In sort of hindsight now, you could sort of see the sort of foreshadowing on that in the past few months with his videos. Everything is blame of we're losing so many men because of the failing. We're being failed by our military leadership. He's been leaving breadcrumbs for his plan. I feel like, he was basically telling the Russian people that he can do it better than them.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I think overall, this was a really daft plan, though. I don't think this was definitely not his plan. Actually, this was his last resort, because 25,000 troops at best. Some Russian border guards didn't stop them. You could say that they were, wouldn't say
sympathetic.
Sympathetic, but not necessarily joining what could have been a revolution. No, like
I think a lot of them would be told not to stop them.
Yeah, I think that's true as well. That there was a very sort of tactical about where and how to slow them down. They did fight.
Slow them, push them in certain safe directions.
Yeah.
But as soon as you shoot at them, they shoot back. Now you're in a conflict.
Yeah.
So I think there was very because of the way that they got into a city straight away in Rostov-on-Don. They occupied a military base there. There's videos online of they brought the army chief out berating him. It looked the army chief was trying to hold his composure like he was voluntary there. But it felt like the Wagner fighters, their demeanor and the aesthetic of it all, it looked like hostage video. The fact that they all had the rifles still on them. He was clearly unarmed. He was like, well, I'm here by my own free will. It's like, you don't look like you're there by your own free will. The fact that you're ushered in by mercenary fighters doesn't look.
Yeah. I mean, I was reading a lot of the telegram. So you have the sort of Wagner telegram, and then you have Wagner sort of sympathetic. Then you have the sort of more normal Russian sort of Ministry of Defense telegram channels. And there was some differences. It was quite interesting. But also, as you could see in the comments, so these channels are quite big. They have tens, maybe 50,000 or 100,000 people following them. And you can see the reaction. So bear in mind, this is an audience of sympathetic followers. Yeah. You could see when they made a post about the fact that the troops had just entered Voronezh, the city 200 kilometers south of Moscow. You could see it was some likes, but lots of like maybe 5,000 likes, but maybe 3,000 angry reacts or angry showing that they were not happy. So
that's it. It's like if you were to ask me about the rants of him before Friday and his frustration with the military's handling of certain situations, I would say, I'm completely sympathetic to Wagner's criticism of Russian supply lines, but that then doesn't justify this action that he took. And I don't feel like there's enough connection between his criticism and that action. I feel like this was an excuse. He did it because he wanted to. It was, in my view, personal ambition. It was opportunism, and he wanted to better his station. He thought this would work for his own greed.
Yeah. I think he definitely seems to have a lot of personal ambition and greed, and that's the part that I think worries me. Is then sort of where does this go? And if we think about the courses of action, so the one where he slowly fades away and doesn't have an important political role going forward, I don't know if that's realistic, to be honest. I can see either one or two being more likely, and one being that basically he gets assassinated in a few months, maybe, or that exiling a bald Russian man for political reasons, with a historical president. This is a joke that Nixon made earlier. That doesn't necessarily always end well. And he is popular. I mean, I know he's not probably as popular as Putin.
I think this action might have damaged his popularity.
Definitely. Yeah.
But I see what happened because under Russian law, still, private military contractors are still actually illegal in Russia.
Yes, that's why they're trying to fold them in. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what will happen is that Russia will still maintain a business working relationship with the Wagner Group, but now, since as part of this negotiation, which we'll approach soon, he is now basically, and the Wagner Group is now based in Belarus now. So I think it's going to be kept at arm's length. So basically now it gives you a better alarm clock that as soon as you see Wagner approaching Russia's border, know, it's sort of like the old Roman law of not marching your army into Rome, no general, and as soon as they cross the Tigris, they're coming to seize power. So I think the Russian border is now the Tigris River, and
it's a good way of looking at it. I also think that you've got a nice third partner with Lukashenko. Who also can observe them and report like, okay, these guys are preparing or doing something.
And Lukashenko, for his payment for that, he probably thinking, well, the Wagner will probably be handy people to keep a hand for
security
when the next election comes around and the opposition try the same thing again. So he wouldn't mind the extra security around him.
Sure. I mean, now people are talking about that Wagner will now launch an attack from the north again on Kiev. I mean, I suppose that's possible, but I think there's a little piece missing here is that the Wagner troops have been offered new contracts with the defense, Ministry of Defense. A lot of them are ex-Ministry of Defense anyway. A lot of them are VDV and Spetsnaz and whatever, along with the prisoners, whatever. But the old, the core of it was still just ex-military anyway. So it's not, not a crazy idea for them to go back to the military. But I'm not sure what that means on the numbers. I mean, I know that, like you said, they've put him in Belarus. But does that mean the company, all of its operations will move to Belarus and it'll become a Belarusian company, still answerable to, the intentions and needs of the Putin government? I don't know.
I think it means that on paper, but in sort of practicality, nothing very much would change. The thing that you really want to change is literally their physical location, isn't it? Yeah. It's just to give you that arm's length.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. I mean, it was an interesting organization. I mean, I think there's something that perhaps we can go into a little bit is, from my understanding, this kind of thing, this PMC, private military company stuff, mercenaries go back, centuries. We've always had mercenaries. But the modern iteration of the PMC, I think there were some examples in the 1960s in the Congo. You had these guys going around and basically answering to the West, but a way for the West, particularly French mercenaries, to go get hold of the mines in Congo during the chaos after they assassinated and executed what's his name, Patrice Lumumba. But like the real sort of ones that we know today, the Blackwater, the American one, right? And then before
they
that,
still exist now. They're just under a different name.
They still do. But the one before that, actually, which I think is the Western sort of most modern equivalent, and where they get the inspiration from, is actually Executive Outcomes, which is a South African one. So after apartheid ended, you had a lot of very well trained special forces, didn't really have a job in the new South Africa, and so they made Executive Outcomes, which played a very important role in Sierra Leone. And I think the UN actually used them to stop rebels in Sierra Leone or whatever. But yeah, that's this whole thing. But the benefit of having a PMC, as Blackwater and Executive Outcomes and Wagner have shown, is that you can have a force that doesn't have the same limitations legally and is not wrapped up with the state, with the government. So it's not subject to the same oversight and budgets and all these kinds of stuff. And also, in terms of what they can do. So you can have troops in Russia, Wagner troops, in Syria, who are answering effectively to the Russian government, but are not actually a state force. And if they clash with the US, troops in Syria, which they have, it doesn't quite jump straight to Russian troops are fighting American troops. We're at war. It creates this buffer, this zone again, which is interesting. And also, it's Wagner has been important with their foreign policy, right? So a lot of these friendly African nations are friendly now because Wagner has been very effective in training them to fight Islamist fundamentalists. Burkina Faso, Mali, and all that stuff.
That buffer, as you said, is something that was used and exploited by the Americans in the Iraq War, where there'd be reported war crimes committed by American troops, and then the investigation would say, "Oh, it wasn't us; it was Blackwater mercenaries that hired to protect the site, so our hands are clean." So the Americans use this trick as well.
Yeah, and also casualties too, right? So if American contractors have died, not American troops, so it plays that role too. Yeah, I didn't quite catch it. What do you think is going to happen with Prigozhin? Do you think he'll stay there and just work with a new sort of iteration of Wagner? What's your guess?
So we don't know what the negotiation was, other than them leave. How it ended with a bit of a Mexican standoff, because they were in Rostov on Den. Reported just outside, there was videos on Telegram that showed a convoy of Chechen fighters surrounding the city. Getting ready to move in on Putin's command and attack Wagner. So Wagner were pinned. It very much was a Mexican standoff. One wrong move and everyone starts shooting at each other. So I think it gave him a bit of a powerful position to negotiate. Of we'll leave, we'll calm things down, but we do want at least the weapons to carry on fighting. So I think that Wagner will return to the battlefield. They've been used for the past few months as one of the main sort of offensive forces. So what happens is Wagner take a city, then the Russian regular army move into taking garrison of the city afterwards. And as a defensive force. So I think if Russia want that relationship to carry on, which they will, I imagine, and do, I hope that this agreement is to give them better weapons or give them better ammunition. But then you'd think, well, how dangerous is that to give better guns to the people that have just threatened to move on to Moscow?
Right. I think that they are going to be much smaller. I think they're going to, if not the entire company, be collapsed into the army, into the defense ministry. I think a large portion of their troops will be. If they can operate from Belarus with a similar arrangement as they had before, then maybe they will do that. But I don't think they're going to have that as big of a force, particularly armed by Russians now.
Interestingly enough, I found an article this morning. I'm just going to get this up.
Yeah.
Share screen. Which I thought was an interesting sort of. There, can you see?
Oh, that's interesting. Yes.
Yeah. So Gurkha forces are joining Wagner due to this policy that Russia have offered of incorporating them into the Russian armed forces. They get Russian citizenship. So Gurkhas, as any of our British audience will know, the Gurkhas are known as absolutely fierce fighters, as the article says. They were quite a celebrated part of the British armed forces for a long time.
Yes, they still are.
Yeah, they still are. There's still Gurkha regiments, isn't there?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, so they are known to be great fighters. So now it seems to be some sort of influx in Nepal of joining Wagner for the sole reason of getting Russian citizenship. The fact that it's our Asia Times, it's probably quite small numbers.
Sure.
But I thought that was quite a significant development, and I can imagine
that is interesting. Yeah, they
might
are
happen
actually
in other places as well. It might seem as a shortcut for legal migration.
Yeah. It's that is interesting. I mean, I suppose it is quite at least appealing to some of the Nepalese guys. Yeah, that they would get citizenship and access to all of that. I mean, at least you're getting access to more land if you get Russian citizenship versus British citizenship. Okay, cool.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I suppose with Russia, the issue hasn't been the lack of manpower. It's always sort of been the lack of now usable equipment.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. Curious. I wonder what they're doing to counter the recruitment. We'll see.
So one thing that I did notice in the videos where they were speaking to the military brass that they'd sort of captured, one of the counterpoints that they threw back was, you do realize that they're now celebrating in Kiev with champagne because of what's happened today. And that point just didn't sort of sink in. And like my theory earlier on, that a lot of this opportunism, he was keeping Ukraine in sort of the back pocket, thinking, well, if I do need to sort of swap sides, I've said enough bad things about the war now to make it look plausible that I was never on board the whole time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this has done harm to Russia, to the war effort, even though he didn't say, oh, I didn't name drop Putin, I didn't criticize Putin. It doesn't matter. You've made the Russian position look weak at a time of that. In Putin's State of the Union address, where he referenced the October Revolution, saying that when we were fighting, and well, really the February Revolution, when we were fighting World War II, the Civil War broke out at home, which jeopardized our rear flank and ended the war. So obviously he's going from an angle of against the Russian Revolution, as he does in just for politics' sake. But yeah, that argument is sort of true. Like if you're fighting you expect your rear to be safe.
Yes.
And
yes. Yeah.
He's jeopardized this.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, opening up an internal front, dividing your own troops. If there is discontent, then troops will join. It does massively undermine the war effort. Luckily, it only lasts 24 hours. I think on some level, we talk about the damage to Putin maybe in a moment specifically, but there was, some people have tried to spin this as it might be four-dimensional chess, that this is actually a tactic, that Prigozhin did this and the Russians done this so that it would lure the Ukrainians into a massive, overextended push perhaps, and then they would exploit it. Yeah. I don't think that's happening. I don't think
that's happening at all.
I don't think the guys at the Duran also don't think this is two things ridiculous.
No.
So I think that's happening. But yeah, so coming back to the point of damage to Putin, I think this would has damaged. It's shaken his image a little. The fact that some troops can just drive almost all the way to Moscow, sort of hundreds of kilometers across the country with weapons and tanks and whatever. Yeah. It's not a stable, safe kind of thing. And they were some of them did die. They did shoot down a couple of helicopters. There was some fighting, which is terrible. For them.
And I think this is sort of where America had that advantage when they were using PMCs, that their PMCs were fighting way overbroad, where they didn't share a home border with the home country they're coming from. If you go into, I think this is a warning that I think PMCs in general are a terrible idea. I think it's a very dangerous idea in the first place. I would have never allowed it to be brought into creation in the first place. Having two armies is always dangerous. You've got two strong personalities, and he, in his Wagner's sort of accusations, it was all against them. What was his name? The Secretary of Defense. Shoigu. His accusations are, he's just started this war in Ukraine because he wants to get be made marshal. So he was acting like it was all done from one person's ego, where it was his own. It was his own ambition and his own ego that has caused the situation right now. He's not It's not so good going on onto Telegram making videos, bitching and whining.
Yeah.
He's the one making these videos, slamming like we both come from political backgrounds, in especially in like a communist party, criticism and self-criticism is such an important part of party building, but you
Yes.
keep it internal. If I've got a problem with the Communist Party, I'm not going to go onto Facebook saying, "Oh, I think the party should be doing this." You bring it where the criticism is needed and where it can be managed. If some outsider says, "Oh, what are your criticisms of your party?" I'm like, join the party and find out. I'm not going to tell you. That's not constructive. That's just slagging the party off. It's the same thing. Like what he was doing wasn't constructive criticism. It was destructive criticism. It was criticism that every time you put one of these videos up, it gets 1,000 likes from Ukrainian fanboys.
Yes. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, and I can't think of any other time where you had an important, effectively a general, commander of a large force, doing that publicly, saying, "Oh, we're running out of ammo," or showing, and also not even if being vague would be bad enough. You're like, "Oh, we're not getting
showing
enough ammo."
bodies,
showing bodies, and then saying, "Shoigu, fucking get the bodies, or fucking look at this," like swearing and like mentioning specifically, like, I've never ever heard like of this, like from a commander. No, like
it's
in
completely
history,
unprofessional.
Yeah.
And I suppose this would be a good sort of time then to talk about him, like, because he was not a military man. He was a con man.
Yes, and a hot dog salesman.
And he was a cook.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, in all fairness, he has created a very effective fighting force. So you can't fault him on that. Like the units in Wagner that fought in Bakhmut, they won. They beat what the best units the Ukrainians armed and paid for by NATO could give them. They won.
As Zelensky has sheepishly admitted in the last few days, which was very underreported, where he's admitted that the counter-offensive has been slow. I mean, it's failed. You bigged it up for months and months and months, and you've slammed it against the Russian lines, and it's done close to little. I've seen a couple of villages being taken. You've lost a lot of NATO armor.
Yes. Yeah. No, and we've finally seen, the invincible machinery, the Wunderwaffen, the wonder weapons, Leopard tanks are not invincible. We already knew this. They were blown up in Syria on the Turkish border. But, there still is this Challenger 2 thing to happen. We haven't seen them, no casualties on those yet. But, the counteroffensive has started, and it's not going well. It's going slowly. But what's interesting, just a last point then for me on this one is the Global Times, the Chinese Communist Party newspaper, has described the front line as being a stalemate. I think that's a strong description. I think we could say that's true. I think we still need to wait a few more weeks, because once any of this momentum or just the forces, the 12 brigades that we know are there for this counteroffensive, once they've spent more time fighting and lose any of the sort of capacity that they have, if the Russians exploit that, then I think the last moment for the next sort of phase of this is after that. So once those 12 brigades are worn out and spent, that we might see a push by Russia. But if we don't, then I think we could say it's in stalemate.
Well, to be honest, we've sort of said something similar on our show for quite a while, but the border where it is now, it does look like it's going to be sort of a forever line. It's not really changed dramatically. As you get into the south around Kherson, the front line has basically fallen over a natural border anyway, going along the river. Yes. If you were to draw a map of a country on the area, you'd probably use that river as a sensible border in itself, because it's easily defendable. Yes. So I can't, unless there is a dramatic failing, I would have expected Ukraine to take what's gone on over the past few days as an excuse to mount an offensive. It's difficult to tell from the numbers. When you see the videos of Wagner in Rostov-on-Don, there was quite a bit of tanks, quite a bit of army armor. a lot of it looked quite sort of rugged, like it had just like they looked battle scarred, like they'd been moved from the front line. They didn't look like spare troops lying around.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how many of these have come from places where they were needed, and if they've left anywhere sort of unmanned doing this stunt. If they have, and the Ukraine take territory because of Wagner's, then that needs answering. That would be unforgivable on sort of on Wagner's end.
Sure. So just on that, I do know. So the Wagner troops were on leave basically. So after they finished Bakhmut, they handed over Bakhmut to the Russian regulars and were on leave. And they were supposed to commence operations, I think, on first week of August, maybe. That date, you kept hearing different dates. Some said July, some said August. But the bottom line is they were on leave.
Yeah.
They were on leave, but also we know that they were on leave. And even though they were going to go back to the front, but they were never going to go back to the front as Wagner. They were going to be adopted because this legal problem, and also because of his behavior, Prigozhin's behavior, that was on the cards too. Like that was happening, and that's why we saw what we saw. On just the border thing, I do think that maybe the Russians would want to either take Kramatorsk and the other city that's just to the south of that. There's two small cities that form the last of the Donetsk region, but it's not a decisive sort of piece of territory. I think it's just a bit more of a buffer that they would want so that they can claim that they have all of the Donetsk area. But yeah, they have all of Luhansk. They have most of Donetsk. They have the cities of Donetsk city itself and Luhansk cities. So they could hold there. And the one thing I did say, notice this is from Zelensky. So you can tell how confident Zelensky is depending on what he says to the West, actually, rather than to his own people or anything. Because he's confident when he says, we're going to take this all the way back to Crimea. But the other day, it might have been yesterday, he said, Ukraine must be and will be Europe's eastern flank. We will hold the eastern flank, and that is what we need to do. So rather than talking about claiming everything back, he's talking about, our job is to be defensive, and that implies that setting the lines in now and basically it implies. I mean, it's a lot of implication on my speculation on my part. But
so he's happy with his country just being a country of trenches to the end of time.
and also where it is now. It doesn't necessarily. But again, that's just one speech, but it's a speech that is unusual compared to his other speech.
Yeah, it will sort of be interesting to see how this goes on.
Well, we've got the NATO meeting coming up in July, so we'll see what they'll have to say. Obviously, they're going to be really happy about this. Obviously, the West has been really happy about this 24-hour coup. Luckily, it didn't get any worse, and luckily, we're sitting here and we're not doing an episode about the Civil War, day 3 or 4, whatever it is now. So, again, glad it's over.
Yeah. So, as much as they say that, because obviously, the Wagner chief, it was a chef. It was Putin's chef, as it was called. So, if we were to refer to what America wanted being a palace coup, this was sort of like a kitchen coup, and one that didn't take to fruition.
Right.
I don't think that we've got very much on that. Like I say,
that's all for me. That's all for me.
24-hour story. We've got a beginning, middle, and end. So, hopefully, this is the last we'll hear of it.
I think so. I think it's not necessarily the last we'll hear of Prigozhin. We'll see what happens to him. I don't think it's going to go well for him, but we'll see.
Hopefully, as part of the negotiation, as they took his telegram off him.
Yes, right. But cool. All right, Chris, thank you very much.
Right, I shall speak to you shortly.
See you soon, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Subscribe.